Today we're going to review a Stihl professional grade chainsaw MS261 and see how it compares to a Farm Boss grade chainsaw. We will also remove some parts from it to dig deeper into those differences. And I even got a tool to do exactly that. Then I will briefly tell you my experience using the chainsaw for the past 7 years. And finally, I will tell you how I managed to get my chainsaw for a much reduced price from a dealership. Generally speaking, Stihl produces 3 different grades of chainsaw. You have the homeowner-grade chainsaw, you have the Farm Boss grade chainsaw, and you have the Pro level chainsaw, with each grade being better than the previous one, and the Pro grade being the highest in the quality. Personally, I would stay away from the Stihl home grade chainsaws, unless you plan for a very light usage, because frankly, I don't believe that the quality is there. But even between Farm Boss and a Pro grade chainsaw, there's quite big differences. For example, if we take a comparable Farm Boss grade chainsaw MS291, the MS261 is lighter in weight, produces more RPM, has more horsepower, uses higher quality of materials, and has a features that the Farm Boss don't have. The other interesting thing is that Stihl doesn't just slap more horsepower and uses the same engine. For the Pro grade chainsaw, they actually use a different engine. And once we take the top cover off, I will show you the difference. But let's see some numbers. If we take a look at the previously mentioned MS291, the MS261 fully assembled with the bar and chain is 13.5 pound versus 15 pound for MS291. It also produces 1000 more RPM and has a 0.4 more horsepower for the engine. Additionally, MS261 uses a magnesium alloy for the body, including the sprocket cover, versus the polyplastic for MS291. It also uses iodized metal for the muffler cover, which means it will never rust on you. On the other hand, MS291 uses a regular metal cover, which, depending on the conditions and the usage of a chainsaw, might eventually rust and you might need eventually replace it. Now, those engines are known for creating a lot of compression, and Stihl has 2 distinct features in the Pro grade chainsaws to help you deal with it. First of all is that decompression valve right here on the outside. I know a lot of people say they never used it, and to be honest, I don't use it that often myself. But I find it very useful when I need to start my chainsaw in the middle of winter, in January, when we have minus 40 degrees and the air is cold and heavy. Helps so much. The other feature that Stihl offers is how the handle is built. You see, as a Farm Boss grade chainsaw, the pull rope just goes straight to the handle and tied there with the knot. But on a Pro grade chainsaw, they actually have the spring mechanism to help you deal with more compression. It's basically made to prevent the handle to bite into your hand. Finally, one last feature on the outside of the chainsaw I would like to show you, and I hope camera will stay in focus, is right here, which is bar Oil Flow Regulator. Personally, I never had to use it, but if, let's say, you work somewhere back in the bush, cutting trees, and you notice that your bar getting hotter, you can increase the flow of the oil to cool it down. As I said, I never used it myself, but I can definitely see how it can be useful. Now let's dig deeper and see differences on inside, because those Pro grade level chainsaws are definitely made for easier maintenance in the field conditions. For example, those screws for a top cover. On a Pro grade level chainsaw, they are just flat screwdriver screws, and you don't need no special tool to unlock them, unlike on a Farm Boss where they use a Phillips style screws and you need a Phillips style screwdriver to unlock them up. The other difference, on a Pro grade level chainsaw, those screws are 90-degree unlock. On a Farm Boss, you have to screw them all the way out. And right from the start, if we remove that cover, the main difference here is the air filter. A Farm Boss grade chainsaw uses a fleece filter. unlike a pro-level grade chainsaw, they use a high capacity filter. That being said, if you have a Farm Boss grade chainsaw, you can also use a high capacity filter because the mounting for them is exactly the same on both chainsaws. Also, remember how I told you that the engines are completely different engines? Here, that is the MS261 engine. And if you look up there, there's a picture of MS291 engine. As I mentioned, they're completely different engines. Let's open the sprocket cover and see how it's different on inside. Now remember how I told you that the Pro grade chainsaw sprocket cover made of magnesium alloy? And that is important because those screws, when you tighten them up, you want them to be pretty snug because those chainsaws produce a lot of vibration when they work. The other thing about those screws is that they cannot be detached from the cover, which is actually nice feature because it means you can't lose them. If you happen to have a Farm Boss grade chainsaw, screws over there can be completely detached. So make sure you have a couple of extra screws in case if you need to remove the cover to, let's say, clean the chainsaw, and if one of the screws fall into high grass, there might be a chance you will not be able to find it. So have few extras just in case. But let's look into the sprocket itself, because there's a quite big difference between Farm Boss grade chainsaw sprocket and Pro level chainsaw sprocket. On a Pro level chainsaw sprocket, the sprocket and that piece of metal, I hope you can see it, sorry, the chainsaw is pretty dirty, they are two different pieces. On a Farm Boss chainsaw, the sprocket, however, and that metal piece is one whole assembly. So if, let's say, you're in the field and you need to replace a chain with a different pitch chain and you want to remove the sprocket, on a Pro grade chainsaw, you will just remove that pin and then can you remove the sprocket and put another one in. On a Farm Boss, however, you will have to remove the whole assembly. There, of course, also is a price difference between Pro grade chainsaw sprocket and a farm grade chainsaw sprocket. The Pro grade chainsaw sprocket is much cheaper because it's just one tiny part, unlike the whole assembly for the Farm Boss. As you can see, there's quite a difference between Farm Boss grade chainsaw and a Pro grade chainsaw when it comes to the quality of materials and the available features. Now, let me grab something to sit on and I will briefly tell you my experience using the MS261 for the past 7 years. And I will also tell you how I managed to get it for a much cheaper price from a dealership. Sorry, had to get all the way inside the barn. It's getting pretty windy on outside and the rain is about to start again. So, we're going to be here. Originally, I got my chainsaw about 7 years ago when we purchased the farm. Back then, I needed a reliable tool to cut a firewood to heat our house in the winter. Now, for those who don't know, I live in northern Ontario, and we get pretty rough it here. In January, it's not uncommon to have minus 40 for a couple of weeks straight, and the first snow usually comes around middle of October, and the cold can stay all the way until beginning of May, mid-May. So, you are talking about 6 months of being cold. We later on switched to a wood pellets heating, but for the first 2 years I was using my chainsaw very extensively, especially in the summertime. We are talking 2 months out of 3, me going back to the bush and cutting the trees every single day for 8 hours straight. Of course, I also used it anywhere else I needed it. I would say for the first 2 years I used my chainsaw anywhere between 500 to 600 hours every year, each year. I still use my chainsaw, of course, but nowadays it's much less. I would say nowadays I use my chainsaw somewhere between 80 hours a year to 100 hours a year. Still decent amount, but not as much as previously. And to be honest, in those 7 years, I never had a single problem with my chainsaw and never had to do to it anything beyond a basic maintenance and cleaning. The other thing I forgot to mention is that my chainsaw is M-tronic, an early version of M-tronic, meaning it has electronic fuel injection and can calibrate itself automatically for the fuel-air ratio and stuff of that nature. And the thing is, the early versions of M-Tronic are known to have a problem. That being said, in those 7 years, I never had a single problem using M-Tronic chainsaw either. And I know my review probably sounds very optimistic and exciting and whatnot. But to be honest, in 7 years of using my chainsaw, it really never gave me trouble. And I always had a good time using it, and it's always been very reliable for me. Originally, when I was buying my chainsaw, I narrowed it down between two choices. The MS291, the chainsaw I mentioned earlier in the video, and the MS261. And after reading all the reviews and comparing features and everything, I really wanted to get the MS261. But there was a big price difference of $340 for MS261 being more expensive. We are talking Canadian dollars here. And so I had a lot of debate with myself if I really need a professional level chainsaw, if I'm going to use it mainly to cut a firewood. But then I'm kind of old school, and I believe if you get in a tool, you should be able to maintain, repair, and use it for the rest of your life. I know, probably a naive thinking in today's realities, but that's how I am. So after debating with myself for a while, I decided to go to dealership and see if they will be willing to sell me the pro-level chainsaw for a better price. I get to dealership, and dealership pretty much tells me, sorry, but we can't do it. But once a year, when the season is over, we do put our chainsaws on a sale. Usually it is a fall time. He suggested to me every time I am in town to come by and see if there's a chainsaw on a sale. He also told me that rather than checking on a website, to just come and check in person. And so that's what I started to do. Every time I will go to town to do a grocery shopping, I would come by to dealership and check if there's anything on sale. That has been going for a while. But eventually, after about 2 months, one of those days I came and the chainsaw was on sale. I was so worried that the sale will not last long that I ended up buying my chainsaw right there on the spot. And so for you, if you're looking to buy a chainsaw and you're looking to get it for a cheaper price, my suggestion would be wait until they go on sale. Just keep checking with the dealership anytime you're nearby. And eventually you will be able to buy your chainsaw for much cheaper. I got mine for $250 cheaper, which is significant because the price difference was, it was almost $1,000 for MS291 and it was $1,340 for MS261. So, big chunk of money. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if yes, please subscribe, click like, and leave a comment down below. And I will talk to you very soon.